Just over 3 years ago, I released a video about Payday Drama. Obviously, the intention was to have a bit of fun with the community's expectations, with the natural response being, what drama? Like we were some other community embroiled in the weekly chaos and accusations that seems to go along with the territory of making content on an online video game. Of course, there was no real drama. The video was a deep dive into an obscure Payday 2 mechanic of the same name, which was a style of video I loved to create. Given Payday 2's almost endless undocumented list of unusual mechanical interactions that you could play around for years without even knowing they existed. It was part of the game's charm, and it was very much a video emblematic of that period for my channel and this franchise's history. I love almost every video I put out back then. Surrounding it are the first few videos in the Payday 2 Challenge series, which really set the tone in terms of difficulty for future runs, the complete story of Payday 2 itself, to this day my most successful and important video, and simply fun, creative videos like How Rich Are the Payday Gang, What Are the Best Mods in 2021, or a deep dive into Payday 2's mythos. Everything I made had no pretense. I aimed to do something different every time, and as a result, each video was a genuine joy to work on. And here we are 3 years later. I'm still proud of my recent output, but outside of covering Raid World War II, which I did more than anything to celebrate the work of the talented team still updating it, it's a tough slog for me to glance through. Update videos, news previews, moody think pieces, and painstaking speculation. It's all in the same mold because I think it's really tough to do anything beyond that within the framework of what Payday 3 has to offer. I have tried, and even more upsetting to me than losing that freedom to be creative I once had is the fact that now when you see a video in your feed talking about Payday Drama, you don't ask yourself, what drama? You ask, which drama? That's how far we've really fallen over the past year. To be clear, this video is going to touch on all of the drama, and I'm going to wash my hands of it as best I can as I discuss each point. I don't think this stench should linger for any longer than it needs to, and I've very intentionally left it as long as I have to discuss most of this publicly to properly allow the dust to settle and not whip up a mob as I've been accused of doing in the past. Obviously, Payday 3 has been embroiled in some form of drama since day zero, be that always online discussions, server incidents, and a constant inability to release an update that doesn't brick the game for someone somewhere on launch, as well as a myriad of hotly debated design decisions, but not quite as venomously discussed as the infamous ammo funnel change, and then more recently, License Gate, as Payday 2 has lost a whole host of its crossover content without any warning as key licenses have expired. I don't doubt for a moment that their hands were tied on this one, as legally discussing this sort of thing in advance of it taking place is quite a grey area, since much of the content disappearing was free and wouldn't have benefited Lionsgate with sales. But it's a terrible shame there wasn't a heads up in advance, as there was when the Scarface DLC was retired several years ago. It's further evidence Payday 2 stands on shaky ground, built on licenses and relationships they can no longer call upon. The foundations of the entire Payday franchise appear to be crumbling before our very eyes. For further evidence, just look at the community divide that opened up in response to the Ammo Funnel blog post. For those lacking context, the plan was to remove one of the game's most impactful skills and replace it with two alternatives that were crafted in line with the game's generally low point of balance, as in, they didn't do very much at all. For context regarding how high impact the initial ammo funnel skill was, and at some point how proud the team likely were about creating the playstyle, during my very first play session with the game back in May, a Starbreeze employee expressly pointed me in the direction of the replenish ammo funnel combo. Internally, they were well aware this was one of the flagships of what was a rather anemic skill system. Anyway, this skill was considered too strong, which is actually debatable as I think it would be fairly balanced in the absence of replenish, but nerfing that would royally piss off players who enjoy the armor-gating style adaptive armor brawl, so this was the play. Now, I can 100% see that this skill was holding a lot of design space hostage, but I believe that Starbreeze are holding far more design space hostage on their own accord by sticking to this floundering skill system and trying to balance everything around the game's weakest skills rather than its strongest and most interesting. But to be clear, this was an argument worth having, with two sides to it that both make cogent points. Whilst removing this skill could open up some fun design space in the future, my take was that going in the direction of removing this skill entirely was simply moving towards a version of Payday 3 that is only enjoyed by a small minority. An important minority who adore the gritty, if limited game Payday 3 was on launch day, but one that simply doesn't have the numbers to keep Payday 3 alive and in active development. The player base voted with their wallets and their time after launch. What they attempted with the challenge leveling system, pure co-op focus, and death by 1,000 cuts has proven to be unsuccessful. So far, any update moving the game in the opposite direction to what we started with has been modestly rewarded by an increase in player retention, so suddenly taking a step back from that approach seemed callous to me and a call made more on the back of a strong ego with a paternal view on how Payday 3 should function. You know the rest, really. We pushed back against it in the internal Starbreeze partner chat, citing that it didn't seem like the sort of progressive change that would benefit the game, and neither was it a good time to take this sort of risk. This is a topic I'll speak on more later in this video, but Lucky, in his ammo funnel debrief video, mentioned that timing, in his eyes, is not important right now because for all we know the future of Payday 3 could already be decided. But I'm willing to stick my neck out here and say, for all I know about business, contracts, and financial reporting, Payday 3's fate is most certainly undecided as of right now, and the huge push in marketing around a Year 1 edition is going to be pivotal. So yes, the timing of this and any change and update at the moment really does matter. I think you'd be naive to suggest otherwise. Regardless, the impression I got from that partner conversation was that this ammo funnel change was decided upon far in advance, and really they were seeking our blessing and voices to sell the change rather than actual feedback on it. That in mind, I didn't intend to cover the change at all until the community had their say, but then the dev blog came out discussing it, which was a surprise as I thought they'd attempt to sneak this through with no fanfare, meaning I saw a window of opportunity to get what I believe to be a regressive step for the game reverted. It was a successful play, at least in a sense, but now the conversation has developed, centered around the ethics of a community pressuring a change in creative direction, and to what extent creators influenced that outcome and manufactured the outrage. And of course, the less than tactful response of the now ex-game director, Mio. That is of course the massive news which has spurred on the release of this video. As of Wednesday, the 11th of September, just under a year on from Payday 3's launch, the game no longer has a sole director. Instead, it has a committee of sorts consisting of Almir and Andreas, aiming to steward the game into its second year. I certainly don't doubt their credentials in relation to the franchise, and do think we'll see a massive shift in community sentiment regardless. A bit of a new manager bounce, if you will. But whilst they understand what the Payday franchise is about better than nearly anyone, are they best positioned to take over a project that is unmistakably not a Payday of old? Right now, that's up in the air. I sure hope so, and I'm excited to see how they position Year 2 for the game. At the very least, I'm anticipating this will lead to a more community-facing, communicative, and collaborative approach to development moving forward. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't reflect on the past 9 or so months since Mio took up the position, with a tinge of regret and a feeling of the lost potential of what could have been. So, as many of you know, I hosted an interview with Mio shortly after his promotion to Payday 3 game director during one of the few high points the game had, if you could call it that, when the Legacy Heist update launched for free in December. In general, I think he came across really well, and I think it's a terrible shame our own relationship broke down as it did. Without going into too much detail, my negatively slanted videos seemed to wear him down, especially anything that implied the team wasn't fully applying themselves towards improving the game. At some point he started to isolate himself from creator discussion, which I can understand when so much of it, as I've already alluded to, was pessimistic. I think with hindsight this probably wasn't the right approach, but I can appreciate the reasoning. I believe this created a passive distance between the partners and the designers, and led to our feedback being scrutinised heavily as an us versus them mentality set in. Whilst I've always reviewed content at face value based on my thoughts and feelings, as a creator I will always try to employ titles and thumbnails that people want to click on, even if they're negatively slanted, which definitely bred a little distrust. Obviously this is all a prelude to the events on the 2nd of August when the blog post went live. Partner videos went live with it, and I worked incredibly hard to put together a script that explained my view of the change without pointing any fingers, although I must confess, I was always keen to share that I was internally against this change, because many times before I've been accused of inaction when it comes to unpopular decisions. Mine and all other pre-prepared partner videos were staunchly against this proposed nerf of ammo funnel, and from my own comments section it rapidly became clear that this was the sentiment shared by most, both active players of the game and bystanders who keep an eye on the franchise. This led to escalations on Twitter, a platform Mio was known to be active on, as well as on the subreddit. Mio was on vacation during this event, and to be frank, no one deserves to have their work life spill over into their leisure time, but that is always the risk you run by maintaining a public persona outside of work, which is directly connected to your formal employment. Of course, the likely correct play was to step away from social media, ignore the comments made in the heat of the moment, and give the situation time to develop, even if that's not entirely fair to ask. But that's not what happened. Mio responded, pretty callously, riling people up even further. Outside of that, Mio's own partner responded to Troy, Red Archer Live, in an unfiltered series of tweets that didn't read kindly. It was a proper Twitter bust-up, unlike what we'd normally see in our neck of the woods. Certainly, that's their prerogative, but so are any consequences for how what they publicly said ends up back at their partner's doorstep. Can you imagine my partner hopping on Twitter to give hell to one of the Payday 3 devs for not making a game good enough to capture a wide enough audience for me to make content on? No, I hope not, and if she did, the book would absolutely stop at me in Starbreeze's eyes, because these kinds of thoughts aren't made in a vacuum, and I would be the responsible party with affiliation to the organisation. It was a mess, and to be clear, there were plenty of those who came to Troy's defence publicly and did so respectfully, but there were just as many who defaulted to the harassment approach, and so neither side really covered themselves in glory here. What I think we can all agree on is that the response to this community and partner backlash by Mio and his partner was disproportionate, unprofessional, and left his already damaged public relationship with the community virtually untenable. It undoubtedly led to his changed role, which takes him out of the public spotlight and firing line. As an aside, I truly believe Mio is a dedicated game designer who pours a great deal of himself into what he makes, which can result in staunch criticism feeling almost personal. I think the Payday 3 role was a bit of a poisoned chalice too, especially for someone who isn't intimately familiar with the prequels and understands the trials and tribulations those games went through from direct development experience. I'm not sure what his next step will be, but regardless, I wish him the best of luck and still believe he's a highly able designer with a bright future. That's that saga covered, but not the video over. I want to directly address the offshoot of the Payday community who were actually in favour of this change, and expressly PD Lucky, who made a video covering that perspective. First of all, please don't despise me because we disagree. I'm very open to a discussion around this topic, but I have observed a fairly distinct correlation between the people who like the ammo funnel change and those who enjoyed the game more at launch and believe catering to the gameplay requests of the masses is turning Payday 3 into a Payday 2 clone, when really, those masses, myself included, just don't understand the beauty of Payday 3's vision. It's easy to be facetious about this when the launch was so disastrous, but I really do get this perspective. However, I don't think the Payday 3 you want will ever have the mass appeal to sustain a game that's financially viable in Plyon or Starbreeze's eyes. Having a properly supported Payday 3 at all is what matters most to me, so I will always pull in the direction that I believe will result in that outcome, which is why we're on different sides of the rope in this tug of war so often. Addressing Lucky's comments, which echoes comments I've seen from these other community members in the past, I don't believe any of us made these videos out of spite or some sense of overly inflated ego, punishing the team for not listening to us mighty partners. I said the same thing consistently throughout the process: understandable change, horrible timing, wrong approach to making it. And speaking more for myself, I don't believe I was ever dismissive of the alternate viewpoint, neither privately when discussing this in the partner channel, publicly in my video when introducing the proposed change, nor publicly since, after joining in on the debate around it. Lucky's video showed images of myself and other partners glibly disagreeing with his post, but that's mostly because I don't think Twitter was an appropriate forum to debate this subject, so I mirrored a more tongue-in-cheek approach I've seen him adopt online. Behind the scenes, I joined his stream the eve of the announcement to discuss the change directly. and whilst I generally disagreed, I fully took on board his perspective and was excited to hear his defense of the ammo funnel change made into a fully fledged video, until the revert came through and instead he used this platform to criticize the approach of both Starbreeze and the partners in this situation. I think this was a bit of a shame. To preface, Lucky is a massive Payday 3 fan and has been a huge net positive for the game with his monthly Payday community days, frequent streams, and really well structured videos. His response was relatively balanced with plenty we can agree on, and I do actually wonder if removing partner early access would be a net positive for my experience with the game. There is a tiny part of me that hates not getting to experience new content with you guys for the first time, although with how bug-riddled things have been recently, we are at least a first line of defense to forewarn against that. Where I take pretty straightforward exception is in how he believes discourse was effectively controlled by our videos. He's right that they're opinion pieces. Unless you're professing to be an unbiased news channel, I think they probably should be if you want to make content worth viewing in a sea of similar videos. And he's also right that certain opinions can be anchoring, so the information you receive early into a debate becomes a more holding reference point that you'll tend to default back towards throughout the debate. However, here's where I disagree. Not only do I have faith in my audience's intellect to develop their own opinions, hell, I've had enough build videos torn down in the past to know you don't just take my word as gospel, but I also believe a large majority of the audience's response to this change was far more vitriolic than any of the creator videos. Most of the creators looked at this in isolation, but many of the commenters on my video were furious around the overall state of Payday 3 and how this decision-making approach was the catalyst behind so many of its faults, which I've never alluded to. This talk of there being more people involved in the discourse than actually playing the game is important too. If we say 5,000 people are playing weekly, but we want 10,000 to be playing weekly in the future, surely the voices of those disenfranchised 5,000 who aren't currently playing but have the potential desire to in the future are just as important in shaping a game that will end up drawing people towards it. If we just take the incumbent 5,000's perspective into account, we're already calling it quits on the future of this game. I've been around the block with Payday for years now. I'll never forget back in the day, I covered the web pages for CrimeFest 2015, the notorious microtransaction safe update. I made a predominantly neutral voice video just reporting the news. At the time, I was gagging for a personality, to be honest. Anyway, my neutral account of the update remains the worst like to dislike ratio I've ever had on the channel. Groupthink is a thing, but it isn't necessarily driven by partners. I truly believe the backlash to this change would have been tremendous even if the partners were all sworn to secrecy. All we did was disseminate the information at a far faster rate than Starbreeze can regularly manage, and the bulk of the community did the rest. We've seen more community frustration emerge in recent weeks surrounding stealth changes made in the Houston Breakout update, which we didn't catch early because we see patch notes at the same time you guys do, meaning when a change isn't discreet, it's tough to nail down in a video. Despite very few partners mentioning the stealth nerfs in their update videos, it's still been the focal point of debate since the update went live, and once more I feel as though Starbreeze could have saved themselves a headache if they just tabled this potential change to the community first. As I've relayed internally, people don't mind things getting harder, but there are right and wrong ways of going about that process. Increasing guard detection towards moving targets is the worst way I can imagine, as not only does it make stealth passively less forgiving, it makes the most satisfying stealth maneuvers, which have always centered around smooth and precise movement, much harder to pull off, encouraging more passive playstyles, instead of encouraging players to actively get better at stealth to compete with the new difficulty. Understandably, people dislike it, the design team are now aware of that, and will be scrambling for solutions, which is all well and good, but they could just cut out the middleman if they propose these changes more publicly in advance, which is something Lucky and I both agree on. As I've already said, this is all drama that stems from a debate well worth having. I do believe Lucky was respectful, even if I disagree with his approach, and I'm particularly fascinated with this discussion around creator power and how that plays into how they handle future updates. The truth of it is, I can't save Payday 3. I could become a full-time shill for this game and do everything in my power to get people excited and more involved with it, and I don't think it would move the needle a jot. It doesn't matter how we frame updates for the game or discuss changes. The community, and by that I mean the bulk of the player base, the numbers with the greatest spending power, have made their opinions on the game clear, and only Starbreeze can make any sort of redemption happen from here. Most people have made their minds up about this game, so it doesn't matter how we frame things these days. The changes and fixes need to be so tangible that the game no longer resembles what it did during that failed launch that turned so many people away. To be clear, I really want Payday as a franchise to survive, and anything I do, be it positive or negative, is in aid of that. If I think a change is a net negative, I'll let everyone know in the hope Starbreeze can course correct, and I'll always give them their flowers when they're deserved. But in truth, this isn't my primary form of employment. I have to remind myself that when I was at my most prolific, back in early 2021, I wasn't yet in a job, and it was much easier to output the sort of content I once did. But it would make a world of difference if Payday 3 was the sort of game that inspired someone like myself to cover the hidden joys of it, instead of lingering around its faults. However, this is a new era of Payday leadership. It's probably the only tenable situation we could find ourselves in after the events of the last couple of months. It's not a cause for celebration, because it's still a sad state of affairs to reach this point. He might not appreciate this, but I truly was excited when Mio became the game's director. I'd spoken to him extensively about Payday 3 at Gamescom last year. He was truly dedicated to making the game better in his view, and whilst we'd butt heads on plenty of topics, I think it's a terrible shame our creator-developer relationship broke down to such an extent that it became tough to communicate things sincerely. I'm hoping this more collaborative, community-driven approach to Payday 3's direction will be fruitful and contribute to a healthier discussion around updates in the future. I wish this new team the best of luck as they attempt to steer the game to a successful year 2, which can finally start to develop the game beyond those necessary changes demanded by Operation Meditbag. Personally, I too am gonna change a few things. I'm gonna output the content I want to and not get bogged down in the malaise of it all. So hopefully I'll be making a video 3 more years down the line, laughing at how it's all come full circle. Thank you so much for watching. I've got a Payday 2 challenge run incoming shortly to hopefully lift the mood, and of course Fear and Greed is now just around the corner to hopefully cleanse the palate. Take care. I'd love to discuss your thoughts on the various Payday situations, be they related to 2 or 3, down in the comments. I'll see you all very soon. A huge thank you to my dedicated Patreon backers. If you want to join this crew in going infamous, check out the link below and pledge as little as $2 to see your name in the credits, or get 24-hour early access to future videos and vote on upcoming content. Take care, I'll see you all soon.